All right, welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast, hosted by the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network, coming at you live as always on the YouTube channel. Brant, different time, different place this week, but we're both happy to be here again. Taking this big bud on vacation next week, so I wouldn't be here for our normal Monday time. But we couldn't leave the people high and dry after doing our Dynasty buys last week. It was only right we got out our Dynasty sells. Before we hit a real quick recap on our Dynasty buys last week, Brant, some pretty large news in the NFL this week that came out in between our Monday episode and today's recording. Dalvin Cook sounded like it was all but done. He was out of town. Then 24 hours later, they couldn't find a trade partner, and he was released. Obviously, this is big fantasy news, not only for Alexander Mattison, but also wherever Dalvin Cook goes, because it's going to be an instant backfield competition. So what do you make of the Dalvin Cook situation?
Well, we kind of knew this was coming. It's been, rumored in and out, all off season. I think it was the last thing I saw. They only owe him $2 million after cutting him. Not a huge hurt. I think Madison is instantly in that RB1 or high RB2, early RB1 conversation. The biggest thing with that is now you got to figure out who's that backup. You really need to pay attention to that because they had a 6th-round rookie they drafted. I'd have to go back through my notes. And
Dwayne McBride.
That's it, McBride. And then they also drafted Chandler out of UNC last year, and then they have Kane Nguyen hanging out back there. I think Nguyen is actually going to be the odd man out if I had to guess, assuming he's going to be the return man there. But I think this is amazing for Madison, and I'm real curious to see where Cook goes. Cook could shake up a backfield or two.
Imagine, the landing spots that have been talked about here recently in Miami, Denver is a possibility. He goes to any one of those places, and he absolutely just tanks the open backfield competition and just completely takes it over in my mind. Although he is getting up there in age, there's still plenty of juice left in those legs. Especially if he doesn't have to be a 3-down back, but he's going to go someplace and be the vocal, dominant ball carrier in my mind.
Absolutely.
All right, Brant. So again, last week we covered buys. This week we're getting into sells. This should be another good one. We're going to come at each other, explain why we should want to sell a player, and then try to tempt each other into taking trade packages involving said player or to move said player. So again, let's get them bibs on, Brant. You ready to eat?
Time to eat.
All right, Brant. So the high kick specialist. So we're stepping into this sell episode. And before we get into it, I wanted to ask you, so typically when you're looking at a player, because it's real easy to come out and say Tyler Algier is a sell because the Atlanta Falcons drafted a guy like Bijan Robinson. Or it's real easy to say, player X is a sell after a big name acquisition comes in. So when you're looking at these players that you sell, are you just looking at guys that you're trying to the dumpster's on fire, the extinguisher didn't work, let's just push it down a steep embankment and see what happens? Are you more along the lines of where I'm at, where you want to trade these guys where there's still a little bit of value left and try to recoup something?
So really only, and with my 4 guys here, really only one of them is where that dumpster is starting to catch fire, and I needed to push it off the hill a little sooner. But the other 3, I really think that I'm moving while the value's still there. I see the I could see the writing on the wall. I could see, what I'm not going to say I could see the future because obviously things change. It's fantasy football. Cook just got cut. Prime example, but I can see the writing on the wall for the downgrade or the sliding, or maybe we saw a little regression that people were missing at the end of last year. And I'm trying to push these out while these names are still high on people's boards.
Yeah, last year, Brant, in our home league, you remember I struggled with the decision on Eckler and Kamara, who I moved both of them last offseason in our local league, and it was a very hard decision for me. And honestly, I kicked myself for quite a while after it. But you and I have had so many discussions on this, and it's one of those things that in a dynasty league, you can't ever rate a trade on what happens initially, right? Sometimes you got to forecast and project these trades out. And, now on both of these trades, I'm sitting a little happier than where I was when I first made said trades. But again, sometimes in Dynasty, you got to get out while the getting's good. I'd rather sell a year early and get a decent return for some of these studs than sell a year late and get half of what they were worth the year before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, kick us off. I believe we did talk about actually Eckler last year being a sell high. I originally had him in my 4, and I go, man, I really feel like I went back through the notes. I was like, oh, I did this one last year. No need to beat a dead horse. So why don't you go ahead and kick us off with your one of your
first. Let's start with it. It's a perfect transition because I'm about to talk about one of his teammates here. This is a guy that I've actually traded for in 2 different leagues this year because I think that this year he's going to have a pretty solid year, but his career is definitely dwindling. That's the 31-year-old Keenan Allen, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. He's coming off of a season where he only played 10 games, Brant, and then the Chargers said, let's go add Quentin Johnston, who projects to be a big-bodied guy who honestly should take over this Keenan Allen role in this offense at some point if he can ever figure out how not to make body catches and starts using his size as a weapon. In 2023, Keenan Allen had 89 targets, 66 receptions, 752 yards for 4 touchdowns. A lot of people last year were really disappointed in Keenan Allen, if you remember, Brant, because it led you to the point where you were guessing between Guyton and Palmer every week on which Charger to start. And it was always the other. And I always started going with the other, and I look like a mad genius every week. But nonetheless, again, I do think there's a bounce back this year for Keenan Allen. As long as he stays healthy, his numbers are going to be somewhat better. Obviously, I would expect a guy of his size to have a positive touchdown regression, or as normal folks would say, a positive progression in touchdowns after the debate or the little sidebar where I went off the rails last week on that. But nonetheless, I do think he bounces back, but I think it's a chance to sell him for the last little bit of value he has. All right, his value could go up in season, but in an off season, it's as high as it's getting the rest of his career. Okay,
absolutely.
All right, Brant, I got 2 trades here for you. They're both solo trades, man for man here. So Keenan Allen, or a guy that you and I have both talked about as a bounce back candidate this year, and Elijah Moore.
I'm going to stick with Keenan Allen on this one just because that Cleveland Browns receiving core scares the crap out of me. I feel like I could get just a little bit more, maybe I'm not going to say a set in stone number 1 wideout, but I think I can get a guy that maybe has a more defined role as of right now. And I think in my mind, I'm all over this sell Keenan Allen. But Keenan Allen, like you said, he's going to be a guy that I think, in my mind, you may want to move a little bit later. Let the beginning of the season kick off. And I think he will be a guy that I would be pushing to go later. So right now, I'm going to stick with Keenan Allen.
Let me backpedal here a minute if I can, Brant, because I do think you will regret moving Keenan Allen for this year. But in a dynasty, you have to look past this year. I think this is the last year of fantasy relevancy for Keenan Allen. Would not shock me to see him put up very strong wide receiver 2 numbers this year. So again, I agree. I think in season, if he takes off, the value is better. But if he ends up with an injury-riddled season like last year, you may not be able to even afford a guy like Elijah Moore. All right. Coming at you with another one, maybe the positional difference and the positional scarcity entices you a little bit here. Keenan Allen or Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders?
I think I'm going to stick with Keenan Allen there.
Okay.
That once again, it's just a backfield that scares me a little bit. That one definitely made me think a little bit. The backfield does scare me there in Washington, but I think I'm going to stick with Keenan Allen.
Okay, I'm striking out here, Brant. I'm 0 for 2 so far, batting zeros.
Yeah.
It's a good thing this is a football show and not a baseball show, because I will be back.
As
right,
I
hit me with
heard
your
earlier
first one.
today, apparently it's points, not runs in baseball. I didn't know that. But no,
that's interesting.
a good buddy of ours.
I always just assumed it was how many hot dogs you could eat in a game. I don't know.
Good buddy of ours said, "Oh, we just put some points on the board." I thought he changed sports on me for a minute. So my guy, I'm gonna get my old man out of the way as you got your old man out of the way. My old man is going to be turning 31 in season as of right now. He's only 30 years old. This one hurts a little bit. The jersey's hanging up in my closet right now, and that's Mr. Tyler Lockett, Mr. Consistent. I told you guys little forecasting last week as I tried to move Lockett on some of these buy nows last week. Tyler Lockett's a guy I'm moving on from, and I think it's a great time to move on from. He's 30 years old. They just drafted JSN. It's still a run-first offense. Yes, I do put the air quotes up because Pete, we've said this a few times. Pete's a little senile, so we're not sure if he knows what run-first is. But Geno Smith's got the reins right now. I don't think he's going to have enough to support 3 wideouts. I got this written down here. It's the last 5 years, he's been so reliable. He's been a top 15 wide receiver in all but 1 year in the last 5. Last year, he saw 117 targets, 84 receptions, 1,033 yards for his 4th consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. So, yes, he is high right now. He's extremely high, but they just added probably, if not the best, the second best wide receiver in this draft class in JSN. A lot of hype in camp about how good JSN has looked. I just feel like Tyler might end up being the odd man out this year and for years to come. I hope he stays in Seattle, and I hope that he's able to put those numbers up, but the writing's on the wall with this one, and I think it's time to move Tyler Lockett right now. Excuse me. So my trade offer to you is a guy that you spoke of last week in Rondale Moore and a late round pick, whatever your last round pick is. Do you take Rondale Moore, take that risk of what's going to happen in the Arizona offense, get the younger wideout, and it's a late, whatever the last round of your rookie draft is. So our home league is a 4th. I think Fantasy Holics is a 3rd. So what side do you lean for?
We got to preface it. Is it this year's draft class or is it next year's?
This year's draft class.
Year's. Okay. I just wanted you to say that because it makes no difference for me. I also think I would stay with Tyler Lockett here. Just very similarly with what I think happens with Keenan Allen, I think happens with Tyler Lockett this year. I think he starts off strong and he fades towards the end of the season when JSN slowly starts to take over. I just don't think it happens early enough this year that Tyler Lockett is not valuable more so than Rondale Moore with at least 6 weeks probably of a backup quarterback. So yeah, I think in the long haul, I could if I'm a rebuilding team, obviously give me Rondale Moore and the 3rd or 4th round pick. If I'm a team that I think I've got a chance to contend or at least make playoffs this year, I'd much rather have Tyler Lockett.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I guess last week we were in cahoots with the trades, and apparently this week we're just not quite there.
I'm getting you on my next guy, Brant. I'm getting you. All right, you ready?
Yep.
You said I got my old man out of the way. I'm coming at you with another older gentleman here. This is going to be a 28-year-old running back in the way of Aaron Jones. All right. Before we get into Aaron Jones, we've got asked here, Keenan Allen or Jonathan Mingo, Brant? Carolina Panthers' new wide receiver.
Ooh, rebuild. I'm taking Mingo. If I'm still competing, give me Keenan Allen. If I'm still competing this year in Dynasty, I'm taking Keenan Allen.
Agreed. Definitely one that is. I like Jonathan Mingo. I think he has a chance to be something good, but I'd rather have the proven commodity right now.
Yep.
All right, Aaron Jones. The last 4 years has been a running back 1 in fantasy finishes, Brant. But this year there's no Aaron Rodgers under center. I don't think there will be as many passing opportunities for this running back field. I'm not necessarily saying this is an A.J. Dillon buy. I'm just simply saying I think Aaron Jones's value as an RB1 is done at this point in his career. I know last year you and I both ended up having him as an RB1 just because of, no true pass catchers in Green Bay, but the defenses aren't going to respect the pass against Jordan Love the same way they did against Aaron Rodgers. I think passing volume comes down anyway. I do think A.J. Dillon out touches Aaron Jones this year. I still don't think it's going to be super great from Dillon, but nonetheless, last season, Aaron Jones had 213 rushes for 1,121 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. Through the air, he had 72 targets, 59 receptions, 395 yards, and 5 touchdowns there. So he ended up putting together a pretty good season. I do think his rushing touchdowns potentially go up a little bit. But again, 28-year-old running back, shelf life's already extremely short. Don't know what that offense is going to look like in Green Bay, Brant. So let me see if I can tempt you. Would you rather have Aaron Jones or the running back in one of the most potent offenses in football, and as Isaiah Pacheco?
I'm taking Pacheco.
Got him.
I really like Pacheco's upside. I just drafted him in our Dynasty startup we did the other day. I really like that offense. I want a piece of that offense, and I think I'm going to go with Pacheco over Jones. I'm hoping that I'm right on the Pacheco train. I'm hoping I'm jumping aboard and it works. But yeah, I'm going to take Isaiah Pacheco on that trade.
All right, let me ask you this other one. Let me see. This one's a 2 players for one here. Aaron Jones or Darren Waller and Brian Robinson. So a backfield you said earlier you didn't want to own too much in, but here is a package deal with Darren Waller.
I'm taking the Waller side because I expect big things from Waller this year. And it's hard to come about a top 5 consistent tight end. I know, top 5 tight ends, but it's so hard to come from a top 5 consistent tight end. And I really am expecting big things out of Waller. He's the one that really makes that trade for me. Aaron Jones is a guy that could end up being consistent or could end up being, playing in a 50-50 role. I think I really want the Waller side, and I'll hold on because I'll hold on to Brian Robinson and hope that he's able to break out the way he should be able to.
Okay. So I went 0 for 2 on Keenan Allen, but I'm 2-0 on Aaron Jones, Brant. Let's see if you can get me on the fence here.
This one's going to be fun. And any viewers that we may have right now, please feel free to comment, yell at me, scream at me when I throw this name out here. I know a lot of people are living on this train here, and that is Mr. Deebo Samuel, 27 years old, plays for the San Francisco 49ers. Last season, he finished as wide receiver 40. A lot of hype of, my sluggish season last year. I won't put that back on film. He had 94 targets, 56 receptions, 632 yards, and only 2 touchdowns. He did only play in 13 games. Now, you have to go back to week 6, not counting any playoff games, to see a game where he had more than 60 receiving yards. All right. He had 18.2 yards per reception in 2021 in his breakout year, and that came down in 2020 and 2022 was 7 yards minimum less than that 18.2 yards per reception. His rushing totals came down when CMC came to town. His passing came down when CMC came to town. Brandon Ayuk stepped up big time for that offense. You still got George Kittle coming back healthy. I really think you have to jump off this train here. He averaged 11.3 points per game and only 53 total yards per game last season. And he only saw 12 red zone looks last year total. So this is one train that I hated in 2021 because I watched it beat the crap out of me way too many times in too many leagues. But I've never actually fully committed to the Deebo Samuel train. And I think it's time to really get off of him. So this is my trade for you. A guy that I know that you liked in Cortland Sutton, you liked, and an injury-riddled back that I know that you're not a big fan of, but maybe entices you. J.K. Dobbins and Cortland Sutton for Deebo Samuel.
I do probably take if God, this is close. If I have a team that I think wins a championship, I take Debo. If I have a fringe playoff or rebuild, I take Dobbins and Sutton, Brant. But I know you're looking for a definitive answer here. I think I go with the two players on this one. Again, you're right. I don't necessarily love JK. I'm not sure he's the number one running back in his team. We'll see if the new offensive quarterback. We'll see if the new offensive coordinator comes to town and changes things. But I can't see the Broncos offense being any worse than it was last year. So I would expect an uptick for Cortland Sutton. I'm not sure it's anywhere near what Debo is going to do. But filling two lineup spots for the price of one isn't ever a bad thing. So I'm going to go with the two players here, but it's real close. And I will tell you, Brant, the only reason I would move Debo right now is because I don't know for a fact Trey Lance is the starter. If it's Brock Purdy, I want nothing to do with Debo.
Okay. All right. That's the only one I had for you. It was so hard to find even numbers with good players to go with that, to try to find a good trade value. I had to go through quite a few sites to try to match them up decently because one site would have had that completely lopsided while the other one did. And I'm like, let's try to find an even ground here.
Sure. There's a lot of legwork that go into these episodes. Not a lot of legwork. A lot of finger movement.
A lot of sitting up
around. Right. All right, Brant. So here's my first controversial one for you. This player is not a player that you have to move due to age. It's a player I just don't trust. That's DeAndre Swift. He's 24 years old currently. And here's my issue. My biggest issue with DeAndre Swift, Brant. His rookie year, 2020, he played 13 games. 2021, he played in 13 games. And then in 2023, he played in
13 games?
14 games. Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
But last season, Brant, I don't know if you remember the headache that was DeAndre Swift as we did our Sunday morning lives. People would come in and say, hey, do I play Swift or do I play Jamal Williams? And for a few weeks, you and I held out hope. Hey, you've got to ride DeAndre Swift. You've got to put him in there. You got to see, what you have with him. And then it got to the point in the season later, you and I were both sitting there going, man, until I see him prove it again, I want no part of him in my lineup. And I know a lot of people are excited about DeAndre Swift getting moved to Philadelphia. They're a better offense, right? Brant, I know the guy that owns DeAndre Swift in our home league was with you on the night of the draft where he saw Jahmyr Gibbs get drafted to the Detroit Lions, and then he was able to breathe a sigh of relief when DeAndre Swift got dealt from the Lions to the Eagles. And I think that's how a lot of DeAndre Swift owners were feeling. So, but again, if you're in a league where somebody's a huge Eagles fan in your league, or maybe running back needy, maybe you can try to move this player. But last year he had 99 carries, 542 yards to go along with 5 touchdowns, 70 targets through the air, 48 receptions, 389 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he really kind of saved his season last year with his PPR work in the receiving game. I don't foresee a lot of that with Jalen Hurts under center, not because Jalen Hurts isn't as good of a quarterback as Jared Goff. It's because Jalen Hurts is so dang agile that it's just as easy for him to take off with his legs and get 7 to 10 yards as it is to dump off to a guy like DeAndre Swift. And then I'll save my outlandish take that you already kind of know how I'm feeling on this backfield anyway for a rainy day here when we do some hot takes prior to the start of the season. But I'm not sure DeAndre Swift finishes as the RB1 in Philly anyway. So for all of those reasons, I'm done with DeAndre Swift. I'm ready to move on from him. This is one of the easier sells for me, Brant. I've got 2 here. I think you're going to be on the fence with the first one. I think the second one's a slam dunk for me. All right, DeAndre Swift, Brant, or the running back going into his second year in Rachaad White, who has relatively no competition in Tampa Bay.
Give me Rachaad White.
Okay. I thought maybe you'd be on the fence with that just because the Bucs look to be a pretty nasty offense this year.
White this year. I'm huge on him. I loved what I saw. I unfortunately had to watch way too many Bucs games on TV last year, and what I saw out of Rachaad White, I am huge on him. He is definitely going to be a guy that I will be talking up when we get to our running backs.
Okay, perfect. So there we are. And then this one I feel like is a slam dunk for me, but let's see. DeAndre Swift, Brant, or DeAndre Hopkins and A.J. Dillon.
God, you know my love for Hopkins. So it's easy. Like in my heart, I just sort of be like, it's Hopkins. It's Hopkins all day because I love Hopkins. That was a little tougher just because I don't know what's going on with Hopkins, but I still think I have to
Correct.
take the Hopkins and Dillon side of that trade. I expect, Dillon to be in at least a 50-50 share. And I'm starting to lean a little more towards that Eagles backfield being a closer than committee than I thought it would be originally. I may or may not have told the guy I went to the draft with that I needed Penny's handcuff the entire rest of that trip down there because I am a Penny owner. But I think that backfield becomes more of a committee. So yes, give me the Hopkins and Dillon side.
Okay, I'm shocked, but I'm battling back, Brand. I'm 4 for 6 now at this point, so we're getting closer.
All right. Well, here's one. Here's my the dumpster has been lit, and I think it's time to push it off the edge guy here. He's 26 years old. He plays for one of the most one of our favorite up and coming offenses this year, and that is Christian Kirk. You know my love for him. I was falling madly in love with him head over heels last offseason, and it paid off as he finished as the wide receiver 11. I went out and made sure to get him in as many leagues as I could. He had 133 targets, 84 receptions, 1,108 yards, and 8 touchdowns, 13.19 yards per catch. That's pretty high there. But there's a man that is in town now that was bursting onto the scene as a true wide receiver 1. And Calvin Ridley is now there in town. The addition of Ridley, the emergence of Evan Ingram, the addition of Tank Bigsby, who can catch the ball pretty well out of the backfield. I don't think Christian Kirk will finish inside the top 20 this year. So moving on from this man is a thing that you need to probably really consider. I moved on from him and went and got DeAndre Hopkins in one of our leagues by moving Christian Kirk. And like I said, he averaged 14.2 points per game in fantasy last year. And I don't see how he can sustain that this year with Ridley in town and Ingram stepping up and Bigsby. And I just don't see, he never finished as a true alpha guy when he was in Arizona either. So I just feel that it's really time. You're not going to get another opportunity to move him at a top 15 number in my mind. So my deal with it is a guy that I'm on the fence with in Romeo Doubs. That's where we're going to start with, Romeo Doubs. And a guy that I said you needed to acquire on a rental in James Conner. Last week I talked about Conner. So James Conner and Romeo Doubs for Christian Kirk.
So I'm gonna be honest with you. This one's not really hard for me. I just want to. I was not a Kirk believer last year, Brent. You know I was not. And I would not be a Kirk believer as a wide receiver 1. But he does get the luxury of coming in as the number 2 behind Ridley, potentially. Should be getting the second best corner on teams most weeks. And I am a huge believer in Trevor Lawrence taking another step forward this year. So unfortunately, I do think I'm going to take the Kirk side. And here's why, Brant. I think as Kirk finished last year, you said he finished as a wide receiver where last year? What was
11.
the actual number?
11.
As the wide receiver 11, I'm way underselling that finish for James Conner and Romeo Doubs. I do think even if he finishes as a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4, that's still a little steep in payment on my end for giving up Kirk. I think I'm going to hang on to him for that price.
So his finishes when in Arizona, now mind you, it was in Arizona. Wide receiver 26, 52, 38, 58 were his finishes in Arizona prior to getting moved over to Jacksonville. And that's one of the reasons that scares me.
If he's going to play as the wide receiver 58, then I 100% agree. Then that's a pretty good value for him as a wide receiver 58. But if he's going to play closer to those games where he had that high ceiling last year, I just feel like it's a disservice to. Now, if you would have thrown in DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner, yeah, I'd probably take that trade. But Romeo Dobbs just doesn't move the needle for me all that awful much. And James Conner, like you said, is a 1-year rental on a horrible offense, at least to start the season. So, yeah, I think I'm staying with Christian Kirk, which I'm sure you want to come through the computer screen and slap the crap out of me right now because you probably thought this was going to be an easy one because I didn't like Kirk much last year.
Yep, I did. I really thought you were going to be extremely low on him.
Yeah, and again, just because I'm so high on Lawrence, and I do believe that Ridley's still got some value left. I think it only elevates Kirk in my mind. But again, I wasn't as high on him as everybody else was last year, Brant. So maybe that's the difference.
Okay. All right.
Here's my last one, and if our esteemed colleague Patrick is watching this, he may come through the computer screen and smack me on this one. I have the 25-year-old Michael Pittman as a dynasty sell, Brant, and I know that's going to sound wild because he's 25 years old at the wide receiver position. Like, that's peak value. The only problem is, do we believe in Anthony Richardson as a passer? Because he's going to have to prove it to me before I'm willing to jump on him and want to own any of the pass catching weapons that will be catching passes from him. So for that reason, I just don't expect him to be a wide receiver 1 or 2. I think it'll be too inconsistent. Last year, he had 141 targets, 99 receptions for 925 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think his targets come down pretty significantly. And I know last year was the quarterback play in Indy was the epitome of a dumpster fire with Matt Ryan. What was that backup that everybody waited to see forever there in Indy?
Sam Ehlinger.
Yeah, there you go. It was it was a bad, but left a lot of bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. And most people are saying it can't get much worse than that. Well, offensively, Anthony Richardson's going to make them better because he can take off and run. He should create pretty good passing lanes with his legs where cornerbacks are sucking in, biting on the run, and he dumps it over their head. But I'm not sure how much of that benefits Michael Pittman, Brant. I'm not a huge Michael Pittman fan anyway, so maybe this is my disdain. I know Lucas in our Fantasy Holic League has been trying to get me to take Pittman for Drake London for quite some time. And then he traded him this week, and I got the new owner sent me a Michael Pittman for Drake London trade right afterwards, and I just couldn't help but giggle. So okay, Brant, I got 2 of them for you again. I think these are both slam dunks here because you're higher on a lot of these players that I'm going to talk about than I ever was. But would you rather have Michael Pittman or a guy who I think could be the wide receiver 1 out of this year's draft class this year, and Jordan Addison?
It's funny you throw that name out there because I'll be talking about him in just a minute. So I am actually going to take the Jordan Addison. I know he'll never be the number 1 on his team, but sitting there as the number 2 target getter on that team, I think I'm going to take the Addison side on that one.
Okay. I'm not surprised. I also would take the Addison side. All right. And then last but not least, this is another 2 for 1 guy here. So you're giving up Michael Pittman, Brant. In return, you're getting Miles Sanders and Mike Williams.
You had me with the first one. I absolutely think Mike Williams is atrocious in my mind. I've never been a believer on that one. I think I'm going to stick with Pittman on that one.
Okay.
I think I'm actually going to stick with Pittman. Carolina, I love Miles Sanders there. I think they paid him to be the 1. But I think I have to go with Pittman. I'm not a Mike Williams believer that Quentin Johnston will be taking over that number 2 role probably quicker than a lot of people expect. And I've never been a Mike Williams believer.
Okay, fair enough, Brant.
All right. Well, you've already foreshadowed my team I will be talking about. And this guy here finished as the tight end number 2 in fantasy PPR last year, and that is TJ Hawkinson. And I say sell him now at his peak value. He will never be a consistent Travis Kelce type guy. I know he had some great games after getting moved over to Minnesota, including 109 yards and 2 touchdown game against the Giants. But the game prior to that, he only had 33 yards. Game after that, he had 59 yards. The game after that, he had 16 yards. His usage was about the same in Detroit as it was in or the usage in Minnesota was almost identical to his usage in Detroit. So that didn't really change a lot. In 10 games, he saw 86 targets and finished as the tight end 2 or 3, depending on your scoring. I did see him in both spots. But with the addition of Addison, you already know who the man, the myth, the legend, Jefferson is already there on that team. Alexander Madison will now start seeing more pass receptions. TJ Hawkinson could easily slide to the 4th option there. Plus, you don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback. I believe Kirk Cousins is going to be the quarterback this year, but what happens after this year? TJ Hawkinson's a guy that I am selling at his peak value right now. He'll never be the number 1 guy like Mark Andrews is or like Travis Kelce is on their team. So here's my fun trade. Van Jefferson's just a guy that I had to use to even it out. I think he's the number 2 on the Rams. I don't know if you believe that as well. And the Rams are going to be playing from behind so much, so Van Jefferson should see some work. So he was a guy that I had to even it out. Here's the big name in it. Do you trust TJ Hawkinson or do you trust Kincaid over there in Buffalo?
Oh, man.
Got to replace the tight end. So we're going to go tight end for tight end. That's what I wanted to focus this trade on when I came out and I looked this up. I was like, where do I find this? Where do I find this? And that was the name that I landed on.
Yeah, Brant. So Dynasty, I'm about as high on Dalton Kincaid as I think I'm going to get at this point, and it's pretty darn high. Snoop Dogg and I riding up there together. That's how high I'm talking here. But man, how long is it going to take before Hawkinson's never going to be the number 1 target in his offense either. So, yeah, I mean, give me Kincaid. I do think Van Jefferson's going to have some value. I don't know if it'd ever be enough where I'd be able to play him. It'd have to be like a 16-team league, maybe. But I do think there's going to be – he's the only field stretcher Los Angeles Rams have. So I could see some plays happening where he gets loose for a 75-yard touchdown, whatever. So yeah, give me the Van Jefferson and the Dalton Kincaid side of it, but it's close just because I think, Dalton Kincaid is going to be a guy that's going to take a year or 2 to really get into his role. But it sounds like Buffalo plans on using Dalton Kincaid all over the field, on the field at the same time as Knox. So he should get some pretty valuable time on the field. I'll take Kincaid.
And when Hawkinson went to Minnesota, I thought the same thing. I thought Minnesota's going to use this man all over. He's the next Travis Kelce. I absolutely loved it. And then you add Jordan Addison, and you're like, wait a minute. You're not doing what I thought you were going to do. So I'm taking the Kincaid side as well. Like I said, Van Jefferson was just there to even it up. I'm a little higher on Van Jefferson than a lot of people, not high enough that he's going to completely bend that needle over. But I definitely think he does have some value, bye-week starter. But, yeah,
okay.
that was the one that took me a little bit to figure out.
Okay, fair enough. So we both battled back. We started out pretty slow, but we both battled back a little bit, Brant. So we got some good sells there. So this kind of concludes our Dynasty buys and sells. It wouldn't surprise me to see some trade talk at some other point this offseason as we get closer. I know we kind of foreshadowed last week this past Monday about taking divisions for running backs and trying to get some consensus rankings out. It's supposed to be rainy all day, Brant, so neither one of us will be enjoying our pools. I'm good to try to do running back rankings next Monday if you are. I know I'll have 4 days where I'm pretty darn busy, but I should be able to hash out a couple divisions tomorrow potentially. So if you're up for that, let's try to bring that to the folks next Monday.
Absolutely. I'll get with you tomorrow. We'll separate these divisions and we'll get to work. We'll start eating. We'll start pre-gaming, getting our appetizers in. That way we can give you guys the main course out there.
Absolutely, Brant. So I think that pretty well does it for our sales episode this week. We can loosen them bibs. We can let circulation flow again, Brant. That's all she wrote.
As always, stay hungry
and stay fat, my friends.